I never saw it coming. How one afternoon in the locker room would flip my entire world upside down. Matt and I had been best friends for as long as I could remember. We clicked instantly, like the universe had decided we were meant to be in each other's lives. High school was just a backdrop to what felt like a perfect friendship. From goofing around in class to late-night gaming sessions, we did everything together. He was my person, always there, always knowing exactly what to say. But lately, something had shifted. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it in the air between us. It was like the invisible line that had always kept us firmly in the friend zone had blurred, and I wasn't sure what to make of it. The confusing part was I didn't even know if it was just in my head. We had a routine after basketball practice. Everyone else would rush out, but we'd linger, taking our time in the locker room, chatting about whatever nonsense came to mind. It was our thing. The locker room was usually empty by the time we were done, and that was when the air between us felt the heaviest. On this particular afternoon, the tension felt almost suffocating. I followed Matt into the locker room, the door slamming shut behind us, and suddenly it was just the two of us. The sound of lockers being shut by the guys before us had faded, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioning. I tried to ignore the weird fluttering in my chest as I started to undress, my fingers fumbling with the laces of my shoes. I couldn't stop my mind from drifting. Lately, I had been catching myself staring at Matt longer than I should and with thoughts that felt wrong. But the more I tried to suppress it, the stronger the feelings got. Every glance at him felt like a mistake I couldn't unmake. We were halfway through changing when Matt glanced over at me and smirked. "What's up, man? You've been acting kind of weird lately." I froze for a second, my heart thudding in my chest. I had been weird, and I knew it. But how was I supposed to explain that without everything blowing up in my face? I forced a chuckle, trying to keep things casual. "Nah, just tired, I guess," I lied, tugging my shirt over my head. I could feel my face burning, my body betraying how nervous I really was. He gave me a look that told me he didn't buy it, but he didn't push. That was the thing about Matt. He always knew when to press and when to let things go. But today, there was no escaping the weight of whatever was happening between us. I turned to my locker, trying to focus on anything but the fact that we were alone, our voices echoing in the empty room. The tension between us had been building for weeks, but it felt like something was about to snap. Suddenly, Matt walked over, closing the gap between us. "Come on, man. I know you better than that. What's really going on?" His voice was softer than usual, almost teasing, but there was a seriousness behind his eyes that I couldn't ignore. My heart pounded, and the words I had been holding back for weeks clawed their way to the surface. I couldn't keep it bottled up anymore, not when he was standing so close, looking at me like that. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I've been feeling something lately about us," I stammered. My hands were shaking, and I shoved them into my pockets, hoping he wouldn't notice. "It's different. I don't know what it is, but I can't stop thinking about it." The room went dead silent. My words hung in the air like a secret I wished I could take back, but it was too late now. I had said it. Matt's eyes searched mine, and for a moment I was sure I'd just ruined everything. The seconds felt like hours, but then, to my surprise, he didn't laugh or freak out or pull away. Instead, he just stood there, looking at me like he was trying to figure something out. His expression was unreadable, and it drove me crazy. And then he did something I never expected. He reached out, his hand brushing against my arm, his touch sending a jolt through my entire body. "I've been feeling it too," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart skipped a beat. Did I hear him right? I looked at him, stunned, and suddenly the locker room felt even smaller, the walls closing in around us. This was real. Matt was actually saying it, saying he felt the same thing I had been struggling with for weeks. For a second, I didn't know what to do. Relief washed over me, mixed with excitement and a little bit of fear. This was Matt, my best friend, the guy I had trusted with everything. And now, we were standing here, our relationship dangling on the edge of something entirely new. He stepped closer, the air between us charged with something unspoken. I could feel the heat of his body, and my pulse raced as his fingers brushed my arm again, lingering this time. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't help but think, is this really happening? Before I could even process it, Matt leaned in, his lips hovering inches from mine, as if he was waiting for some kind of signal. Time seemed to slow down. Every second stretched out as I waited for what would happen next. And then, just like that, he kissed me. His lips were soft against mine, and for a second, my mind went completely blank. It was like every thought I had, every fear, every doubt just evaporated in that moment. The world outside the locker room didn't exist. It was just me and Matt, his lips pressing into mine, his hand still resting on my arm. But as soon as that moment began, reality came crashing down. My best friend was kissing me in a locker room where anyone could walk in at any second. My mind started to race again, and I pulled back breathless, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. What are we doing? I stammered. Taking a shaky step backward, I ran a hand through my hair, trying to gather my thoughts, but it was impossible. Everything was spinning out of control. Matt didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I don't know, he admitted, his voice low and full of uncertainty. But it feels right, doesn't it? Did it feel right? I wasn't sure. My whole body was buzzing, every nerve on high alert, but my mind was screaming at me to stop, to back away before this went any further. This was Matt, my best friend. If we crossed this line, there would be no going back. I don't know, man, I muttered, pacing in front of my locker. I couldn't even look at him. This is crazy. We're best friends. What if we ruin everything? The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Matt didn't say anything. The silence was deafening, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. What if I'd already ruined everything? What if this one moment of weakness destroyed our friendship? But then Matt took a step forward, closing the distance between us again. He reached out, his hand resting on my shoulder, and when I finally looked up, his eyes were full of something I hadn't expected. Determination. We won't ruin anything, he said, his voice firm. I've been thinking about this for a while now. It's not just some random thing. I've wanted this, and I think you have too. My heart skipped a beat. He was right. I had wanted this. But admitting that felt like stepping off a cliff with no idea where I'd land. The feelings I'd been trying so hard to suppress, the ones that had been simmering just beneath the surface, were finally bubbling over, and I couldn't control them anymore. I don't know what to do, I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. I felt like I was caught in a storm, pulled in two different directions. Part of me wanted to grab Matt and kiss him again, to see where this could go. But the other part of me was terrified of what would happen if we crossed that line. Matt's hand slid from my shoulder down to my wrist, his touch steadying me. We don't have to figure it all out right now, he said, his voice soft. We can take it slow, see what happens. I swallowed hard, my pulse still racing. And if someone finds out, if the guys on the team, we'll be careful. Matt interrupted, his eyes locked on mine. No one has to know, not yet. His words sent a thrill of excitement through me, but there was a weight to them too. Keeping something like this a secret, it felt dangerous. But that was part of what made it so intoxicating, wasn't it? The risk, the thrill, and standing there, with Matt so close I could feel his breath on my skin. I realized I wanted to take that risk. Okay, I whispered, the words slipping out before I had time to second-guess it. Matt's eyes lit up with something between relief and excitement, and before I could stop myself, I reached for him, pulling him back in. This time, the kiss wasn't hesitant or unsure. It was hungry, desperate, like we were both afraid that if we didn't grab onto this moment right now, it would slip away forever. His hand slid around my waist, pulling me closer until our bodies were pressed together. The locker room felt even smaller now, the air thick with tension. I could feel the heat of his skin through the thin fabric of our shirts, and it was like every touch, every breath set me on fire. But there was more to it than just the physical. This wasn't just about the kiss or the way his hands felt on my back. It was about all the emotions we'd been holding back for so long. All the late-night conversations, the inside jokes, the silent looks we'd shared over the years. It had all been leading to this. And now that we were here, I couldn't believe it had taken us so long to figure it out. But as the kiss deepened, the reality of our situation started to creep back in. We were in a locker room. For God's sake, at any moment, someone could walk in and catch us. The thought sent a jolt of panic through me, and I pulled back, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. "We should stop," I gasped, glancing toward the door. Someone could... But Matt just shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "No one's coming back. Practice ended a while ago." I wanted to believe him, but the thought of getting caught still made my stomach twist. I took a step back, putting some distance between us, even though my body was screaming at me to close the gap. "We can't do this here," I said, my voice a little steadier now. "It's too risky." Matt looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then he nodded. "You're right, but we're not done, are we?" His question hung in the air between us, and I knew exactly what he was asking. Was this a one-time thing? A moment of weakness that we'd both walk away from, pretending it never happened? Or was this the start of something more? I didn't have an answer, not yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want it to end here. "No," I said quietly, my eyes locked on his. "We're not done." Matt smiled, and it felt like a promise that whatever happened next, we'd figure it out together. But even as relief washed over me, there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that we were diving headfirst into something dangerous, something we couldn't undo. And as we grabbed our bags and headed for the door, the tension between us still crackling like electricity, I knew that things were only going to get more complicated from here. But I also knew he was right. We were not done. And certainly he was right, because I did not know it back then, but much more intimate things were going to happen than what happened there. Because once you cross a line like this, there's no going back. After that day in the locker room, everything changed. I tried to go back to how things were before, just being friends, playing it cool like nothing had happened. But it was impossible. Every time I saw Matt, all I could think about was the way his lips had felt against mine. The way his hands had grabbed at my waist like he couldn't get enough of me. It was like there was this invisible thread pulling us together, and no matter how hard I tried to act normal, I couldn't escape it. The next few days were a blur of confusion and tension. Matt and I barely talked about what had happened in the locker room, but it was always there, hovering between us like a secret. We'd meet up after school, play basketball with the guys, or hang out in the cafeteria like we always did. But there was this new energy between us, something unspoken simmering just below the surface. A stolen glance here, a brush of hands there. It was like we were testing the waters, seeing how far we could go without tipping the scales. But I knew that wasn't going to last forever. It was a Friday afternoon when everything came to a head. We were hanging out in Matt's room, sprawled out on his bed after a long practice. His parents were out of town for the weekend, so it was just the two of us. We'd done this a million times before, hanging out, watching TV, joking around. But today felt different. I could feel it the second I walked into his house. The air between us was thick with tension, and I knew something was going to happen. We were halfway through a movie when Matt paused it, sitting up and turning to face me. His expression was serious, more serious than I'd ever seen it. "We need to talk about what happened," he said, his voice low but steady. I felt my heart skip a beat. I had been waiting for this conversation, but now that it was happening, I wasn't sure I was ready. "Yeah," I mumbled, shifting nervously. "I guess we do." Matt didn't waste any time. "I know things have been weird since the locker room, but I need to know where you stand. Is this just some weird phase, or is it something more?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't really let myself think that far ahead. All I knew was that I couldn't stop thinking about him, about that kiss, about everything that had happened between us. But was it something more? Was I ready to admit that? I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his question pressing down on me. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I've been trying to figure it out, but everything's just so confusing. Matt's eyes softened and he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. I get it, he said quietly. But I need to know if we're on the same page here. Because if this is just a one-time thing for you, I need to know before I let myself get in too deep. His words sent a jolt of fear through me. Was this really happening? Was Matt really saying he wanted more? Part of me had been so terrified of ruining our friendship that I hadn't let myself believe that this could be real. But now, sitting here, looking into his eyes, I realized that maybe, just maybe, he felt the same way I did. I don't want this to be a one-time thing, I said finally, my voice steady, even though my heart was racing. But I don't know how to handle it. I don't know what this means for us. Matt let out a breath, like he had been holding it in this whole time. He gave me a small, relieved smile and scooted closer, his knee brushing against mine. We don't have to figure everything out right now, he said. I just want to know if you're in this with me. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I'm in. The tension that had been building between us seemed to dissolve in that moment, replaced by something new, something more certain. Matt grinned, a playful glint in his eyes as he leaned in, his hand resting on my thigh. Good, he whispered, his lips inches from mine, because I've been waiting for this all week. Before I could respond, he kissed me again, and this time there was no hesitation. His lips moved against mine with a sense of urgency, like he had been holding back for too long and now couldn't stop himself. I kissed him back, my hand sliding up to the back of his neck, pulling him closer until we were pressed together on the bed. The room seemed to spin around us, and for a moment it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Matt's hands roamed over my body, his touch igniting every nerve in my skin, and I could feel the tension between us building with every second. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and I didn't want it to stop. But just as things were heating up, reality came crashing back. My mind started to race with a million thoughts. What were we doing? What if someone found out? What if this changed everything between us for good? The fear of crossing that invisible line again hit me hard, and I pulled back, breaking the kiss. We shouldn't be doing this, I muttered, my voice shaky as I tried to catch my breath. Matt looked at me, confused and a little hurt. Why not? No one's here. It's just us. That's not the point, I said, running a hand through my hair. What if someone finds out? What if this messes everything up? He sat back, staring at me for a long moment before sighing. Look, I get it. You're scared. So am I. But we can't keep running from this. We can't just pretend it didn't happen. I'm not pretending, I snapped, my frustration boiling over. But this could ruin everything, Matt. Our friendship, the team, our lives. People talk. You know how they are. Matt clenched his jaw, his eyes hardening. So what are you saying? That we should just stop? I hesitated, torn between what I wanted and what I was afraid of. The truth was, I didn't want to stop. I wanted Matt. I wanted this. But the fear of what would happen if people found out was too much to ignore. I don't know, I said quietly, my voice barely audible. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy between us. Matt looked down, his expression unreadable, and for a second, I was sure I had just pushed him away for good. But then he reached out, his hand resting on mine. I don't want to lose you, he said, his voice soft but firm. But I also don't want to live my life hiding who I am. If this is too much for you, I get it. But I can't keep pretending like this isn't real. His words hit me hard, and I realized that Matt was right. I couldn't keep running from this. We couldn't keep hiding from what was happening between us. But I wasn't ready to deal with the fallout either. I don't want to lose you either, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. But I don't know if I'm ready for all of this. Matt nodded, understanding flashing in his eyes. We'll figure it out, he said. Together. We'll take it slow, okay? I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. Okay, Matt smiled, and just like that, the tension between us eased. He leaned in, kissing me softly, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. Whatever happened next, we'd figure it out. Together. After that night, everything changed between us, not just in the obvious way, but in every single detail of how we lived our lives. Matt and I found ourselves walking a tightrope, balancing between the excitement of something so right when it was just the two of us and the terrifying prospect of everything unraveling if the world found out. It was a constant pressure, always lurking in the back of my mind. We became careful. We had to. In high school, secrets like ours were like a live wire. One wrong move, and you could burn down everything you'd built. It wasn't just about us. It was about the team, our reputations, our futures. High school was brutal enough without adding fuel to the fire. But even with all of that hanging over us, we couldn't stop. Every glance, every accidental brush of fingers felt like a promise of more. The tension between us crackled, electric, and the line between friendship and something much deeper had long since blurred. It was like playing with fire. And deep down, I knew that eventually we were going to get burned. For a while, though, we managed. After practice, we'd meet at his house or mine, sneaking away to spend a few stolen moments together. Those were the moments that felt real, like the world outside didn't matter as long as we were together. Every kiss, every touch was filled with a sense of urgency, like we were making up for all the time we hadn't realized we'd been waiting for this. We never really talked about it, about what it meant or what we were going to do, but we both knew it was real. It wasn't just some passing phase, it was us. But the locker room wasn't done with us yet. It was late in the season, just before one of the biggest basketball games of the year. The whole school was buzzing with excitement. The locker room was packed, music blasting from someone's phone, the usual pregame chaos all around us. Matt and I kept our cool, careful not to let anything slip, even though the tension between us was always there, simmering beneath the surface. The danger of being caught was like a shadow hanging over us, and it never went away. And then it happened. We were changing jerseys, sneakers, the usual routine when I felt it, a shift. I glanced over at Matt, just for a second, and that's when I saw it. Eric, one of the loudmouths on the team, was standing by his locker, his eyes flicking between me and Matt. There was something in his expression that sent a wave of panic crashing through me. Suspicion. He knew something. I quickly turned away, pretending I hadn't noticed, but it was too late. The damage was done. My mind raced, panic surging through me. Had we slipped up somehow? Had Eric seen something? Every time I caught him looking in our direction, my stomach twisted. He was the last person I wanted sniffing around. That night, after the game, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to go wrong. I met up with Matt like usual, but he was already on edge when I walked into his room. His face was tense, and he was pacing back and forth. "Did you see the way Eric was looking at us?" Matt asked, his voice low, anxiety clear in his tone. I nodded, closing the door behind me. "Yeah, I saw." "You think he knows?" "I don't know," Matt muttered, running a hand through his hair. "But if he does..." He didn't have to finish the sentence. We both knew what could happen if word got out. High school was a shark tank, and people like us were the blood in the water. One hint of a rumor, and our lives would be ripped apart. The thought of it was terrifying. "We need to be more careful," I said, even though the words felt useless. We'd been careful, and somehow it still felt like the walls were closing in on us. Matt sat on the edge of his bed, his hands clenched into fists. What if he says something? What if he starts spreading rumors? The fear in his voice mirrored my own. This wasn't just about our secret anymore. It was about everything. Our futures, Our reputations. The way people would look at us. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. "We'll deal with it," I said, though I didn't really know how. "If he knows, we'll deal with it together." Matt looked up at me, his eyes searching mine for reassurance. "Together? Always," I said softly, sitting down beside him. Our shoulders brushed, and for a moment, the fear seemed to fade. We were in this together, no matter what happened next. But things weren't that simple. The next day at school, the rumors started. It began with whispers in the hallway, the kind of whispers that send a chill down your spine even if you don't know exactly what's being said. By lunchtime, I could feel the weight of people's eyes on me. Matt wasn't in any of my classes that morning, but I knew he was feeling it too. Eric must have said something to someone, because by the time the afternoon rolled around, the gossip had spread like wildfire. And then, just before lunch, I saw it. Someone had scrawled a message on my locker door in thick black marker. Fags! The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, staring at it, my hands trembling, my mind buzzing with white noise as the hallway bustled around me. But all I could hear was the roar in my ears. They knew. Somehow, they knew. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to find Matt, to tell him what had happened, but before I could even move, I heard a voice behind me. "You gonna cry about it?" I turned around to see Eric leaning against the lockers a few feet away, a smug grin plastered on his face. He crossed his arms, clearly enjoying the chaos he'd caused. "Looks like the secret's out, huh?" He sneered. I felt my pulse spike, anger bubbling up inside me. How had this happened? How had things spiraled out of control so fast? I could barely think, my fists clenched at my sides. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to wipe that smug grin off his face, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. So I just stood there, frozen, as the hallway seemed to close in on me. And then out of nowhere, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around, and there was Matt standing beside me. His jaw was set, his eyes burning with anger. But there was something else in his expression, too. Something like determination. "We're not hiding anymore," Matt said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My heart skipped a beat. What was he doing? This wasn't the plan. We were supposed to keep things quiet, stay under the radar. But Matt, he wasn't afraid anymore. He wasn't hiding, not now. Not ever again. Eric's grin faltered, and for a moment, the entire hallway seemed to go silent. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on us, but Matt didn't back down. He stood tall, his hand still on my shoulder, his message clear. We weren't going to be pushed around anymore. "Come on," Matt said, tugging me forward, his grip firm and steady. I followed him down the hallway, the whispers growing louder behind us, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't care. I wasn't sure if this was the right move, if we'd regret it later. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. For so long, we'd been hiding, living in fear of what people would say, of what they would think. But now, walking beside Matt with my head held high, I realized that none of that mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was us. No more secrets. No more lies. We reached the exit doors of the school, and as we stepped outside into the cold, biting air, Matt turned to me, his eyes softening. He still had his hand on my shoulder, and the simple gesture made my heart swell with strange mixture of relief and nervousness. "What now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know something." "Follow me," Matt said. I took his hand, and I followed him. After a minute, I knew where he was going, and it quite excited me. "Are you going to the locker room, Matt?" He did not say anything, and once we arrived in the locker room, I knew what his plan was. For a moment, he looked me in the eyes, and then he turned me around. Yeah, that was Matt. It was amazing. He's crazy as anyone could walk in at any moment. But that's what made it so exciting. He was done quite quickly, but that didn't bother me. Matt smiled, a little uncertain, but steady all the same. "We keep going, together. Whatever comes next." I nodded, feeling the weight of those words. Together, as we walked away from the school side by side, I knew the hardest part wasn't behind us. There would be more whispers, more stares, and probably worse things. But none of that mattered right now, because in that moment, Matt and I had finally chosen to stop running, to stop hiding from who we were and what we felt for each other. The world wasn't going to make it easy, but I didn't care. We had each other, and that was enough. I walked beside Matt, feeling the weight of everything we'd just faced lift if only for a moment. But as we stepped into the open air, I knew deep down this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. And the hardest part, it was still to come.